Welcome back. This is episode 13 of the Union. Myself with my amazing sister, Carrie Rodriguez. We've already started talking offline about sort of the state of our country, where we are, what we're going to need to do to sustain ourselves for the next 3 years. And so this is going to be a very interesting show today because technically, the U.S. government is shut down, Carrie. And so we're going to talk about that today, some other things. But just all in all, how you doing?
Curtis, I got to be honest with you. Can I be vulnerable on our podcast? Can I just break it down?
You go with me, but I don't know who's watching, so like I can't speak for them. But go ahead.
Listen, you know what you get with me. Like I'm the same everywhere, any space, right? So I just got to be real honest, okay? It's been a long week. It's been a real long week, and it's Friday morning. It's payday here at MPU. I was like, you know what? I'm going to treat myself this morning. I'm going to get myself a beautiful sausage McMuffin. I'm going to get myself a little hash brown, like, because that's it. It has been a long week. And, mama just needs that grease this morning, like just something just to give you a little something. And I pulled up to McDonald's this morning and they're trying to charge me $3.39 for a hash brown.
I think I saw that you posted that.
And I got to tell you, like, this is after, like, earlier this week, I went to the grocery store. I bought 2 things of coffee and a little thing of pastry dough because I was like, you know what, I'm going to make a little sweet treats. I got to do something to keep my positive energy up here. And those 2 things of coffee and that little pastry roll, $53 at the supermarket. So I'm bringing this up because, like, I can't pay $3.39 for a little hash brown at McDonald's. I can't afford, like, to pay this much for coffee. I mean, these are things that, and I'm not unique. Like, you're not unique. Like, we're going to the grocery store. We're just out here trying to do normal things, live our lives. Like, and I'm talking about buying a little jug of Folgers. I'm not talking about Starbucks or nothing. Like, I'm just plain old coffee. This is what life is like in America right now. And then you add on to it, a lot of the political instability. And I was just in Chicago this past weekend and unfortunately had to see firsthand what it's like, not just for parents in the organizing space, but on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, just trying to sit out in the park and you've got, federal troops walking through, it is nonstop. It is really tough to be a family in America right now. It is really tough to be a kid in America right now. And with this government shutdown, like, it doesn't look like the hurting is going to stop anytime soon. So I just got to be real. Like, I'm not that unique. I'm a mama here with 5 kids. I live in Woburn, Massachusetts, like pretty average modern American family here. And man, these prices are hitting me between the eyes. I'm really worried about our democracy. I'm worried about if we're going to have a functioning government. But I don't know. How do you see it, Curtis? Because this is just, maybe I'm just feeling some kind of way because I didn't get my hash brown this morning.
Well, I think what we have to do is not normalize and get used to the things they are, and sort of, I think our natural tendency is to adjust. This is how it is, and not create a plan or a strategy to push back. People are being pushed on so many sides. We have women leaving the workforce at numbers that we haven't seen in such a long time. Some of y'all might have heard over 300,000 Black women lost their jobs. Many of them worked in the federal government. You have women overall who are leaving the workforce because lack of child care, and then and issues around return to work policies and things like that. And so you have pretty much the foundation and backbone of a lot of homes and communities being, shuttered because of lack of resources going in and out of the communities, which affects small businesses in those communities, but also affects our students who really rely on a stable household and the ability to sort of just do the basic things that a lot of us grew up being able to do without thinking about. And so it's struggles out here. I mean, whether you're paying for gas, trying to go to, trying to eat out every once in a while, but then also, Carrie, the holidays are coming up. You got Thanksgiving, you got Christmas, you got, Kwanzaa, you got, Hanukkah coming up. Folks are going to have to reconsider holidays, whether to travel to see loved ones when you really need to see loved ones right now. And so, we need to come up with a plan because right now, our leaders don't seem to have one.
And I think it's really important what you just said. Like, some folks might be popping onto our podcast saying, like, why are these folks talking about the economy? Why are they talking? Because it's all interconnected. And, in my work, I've long said, when I've gotten the side eye around, like, well, why do you care about breakfast after the bell? Why do you care about, these poverty issues or the child tax credit? Like, to me, it's real simple. Hungry kids can't learn. And being a mama and knowing how my little boys react when they're hungry, or just being a 46-year-old woman and knowing that you can't even talk to me, let alone teach me something if I'm hungry. Like, you think about like what we're asking little people to do, sitting still in a classroom when they're hungry. And they're going to act up. And for kids like ours, that can be the first step to the school to prison pipeline. Because our kids, like, instead of just saying, well, here's a little boy who's hungry and fidgeting and acting a fool and doing what little boys do when they're grouchy and they haven't eaten, they end up in the principal's office. And sometimes they end up with a school resource officer. And sometimes, and again, like that small thing, like a kid that doesn't have a granola bar in the morning or can't get a muffin, like that can change the trajectory of their whole life because of how they're tracked after one stupid incident. So to me, like, when we start talking about the economic impact and how this is hitting families, or we start talking about, like you and I will talk about today, like right now, WIC is going to be impacted by the potential government shutdown. And that program not being funded means that, babies and toddlers and pregnant women are not going to have healthy food to eat. That eventually is going to hit us in education. And we're going to wonder why, well, geez, why aren't these kids prepared, or why aren't they okay? And it's decisions like this that have longer term impact. But the child care thing too. I mean, we got to talk about the fact that October 1st, there are lots of Head Starts across this country that needed that federal funding to keep the doors open. And now it's this waiting game. Are they going to be able to cover payroll? Are they going to have to shut it down? If they shut down a Head Start, mama's not going to be able to go to work. Who's going to watch the babies? What's going to happen to their home? Kids that don't have access to Head Start, are they prepared for kindergarten and first grade? This domino effect that these decisions have on like the longer term impacts of what we're talking about today. Like, we got to start thinking about these things and how education and our advocacy needs to incorporate, like, think through a lot of this stuff.
And to add insult to injury, you have furloughs. So you have people who working in federal agencies in Washington, but around the country, who aren't getting paid. And there's certain provisions that will allow them to get that back money whenever this shutdown's over. But in the meantime, the average American doesn't have a lot of savings. And so being able to purchase, that hash brown when you're not getting any money coming in is struggling. And you and I, we travel a lot. I'll be traveling later today. And the TSA agents, they have to be there, but they're not getting paid. And so just at the education department alone, 87% of the workforce at the U.S. Department of Education is being furloughed. And so if you want to get sort of a really good example of how this is impacting folks, I'm just going to give you some data that we're finding. So 87% of the workforce is being furloughed, but you also have particularly those places around the country that really benefit from what they call impact aid being really detrimentally impacted by the shutdown. And so, over 1,000 school districts around the country nationwide rely on this impact aid. And these are funds that are not forward funded. So a lot of agencies that are less impacted, initiatives that are less impacted by this shutdown education department, because those funds were, distributed in July and August, and some of them are using that at least up in hoping that this shutdown doesn't last very long. But in the immediate sense, these 1,000 districts, that really, compensate what they call this tax-exempt federal property, and many of them include, sadly enough, our military bases. And so the folks who serve who serve us, who have schools on those bases, are being impacted. Similarly, our Native American population on those tribal lands, those payments come monthly and they're not forward funded in months in the past. So these folks, they can't cover teacher salaries at these military bases, schools on bases and some of these reservations, some of the utilities and other things like that, because they cannot generate sort of local revenue that most districts can and use that to compensate. So you're seeing these things happen, districts, but also you're seeing that investigations into civil rights complaints are stopping because we're in this shutdown. You also see there are no new federal grants being issued as well, and so these are things that we really need to look at, because right now people are hurting. You have people who need the money the most not getting it, and yet we don't have a solution, and we don't have our leaders coming together to fix this, Carrie.
And we were already in a tough spot with the U.S. Department of Education. I mean, we already had a significant reduction earlier in the year. I mean, we've talked a lot about that. Some of us have sued over that because we're deeply concerned about that Office of Civil Rights and who's there. Are we just, as parents and families that need to go to the federal government to ensure that our kids are being provided FAPE and their rights are being protected, are we just yelling into the void? Because they've literally cut back the people who triage complaints from folks like me, who have to go in and say, like, listen, this district or this school is not actually fulfilling this IEP, or is not upholding rights and protections for these kids. And so we already know that these roles have been extremely reduced. They were reduced to what I think it's about 2,200 folks, and now upwards of 80% of those folks are now furloughed. So now we're talking about maybe 200 folks running the U.S. Department of Education for 55 million children across the country, and making sure that their rights are protected. That is wild. And the idea that, like, these folks are now being thrown into limbo because we're calling it a furlough, but at any moment we are waiting for the Office of Management and Budget to tell us. OMB is going to tell us, and Russ Voigt and the folks who were literally the fathers of Project 2025, who said if they had this moment, they were going to gut the government. We're just waiting to hear what they're going to do, because these furloughs could transition into permanent firings and permanent reductions, because the president has already said that this is not about a policy disagreement. This is about punishing, and any department that he looks at as being a Democrat department, and certainly he does that with the U.S. Department of Education, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what is going to happen here. And again, this is unprecedented. I think you and I can sit here and say, well, he would never do that, or that could never happen. But we're in really unprecedented territory right now. And I got to tell you, as an American who's paying attention, this is really unsettling, and it's really disturbing for us to be here in this moment.
Yeah, and I think the lack of sympathy, empathy, compassion for our families, our educators, our students, our parents is one that I think a lot of us is probably the most stark. Everything I just mentioned about the education department being shut down, one of the few things that's still up is that, guess what? Student loan payments are still due. So in spite of everything we're talking about, on a skeleton staff at the education department with all the things that are backed up, people are still asked and required to pay their student loans, unless they default or have to get late payments and things like that. And so we started off about how hard it is just for everyday Americans in order to just survive in a lot of ways. But even in a shutdown, people are still asked to come out of their pockets and pay these loans. And so again, I think for us, it's really about highlighting what's going on, and we don't want to just sort of be Debbie Downer the entire show, but to know how this impacts you. And so let's just sort of deviate a little bit, Carrie. You do this better than anybody. What should people be doing right now as it relates to reaching out to their elected officials to say that this is how this is what I'm going through. This is how I feel. This is what I need you to do. What are some of the things that you're telling the parents around the country about who they should be calling and what they should be saying when they call?
I say number one, you have to get your information from a really dependable source. Right now, there's so much flying around social media and partisan media right now. You really have to have like really good legacy, reputable sources of the media that are you're getting your information from. And frankly, it's really nerve wracking right now because again, going back to the shutdown, if you go to government websites right now, you can see there's actually a partisan message blaming Democrats for the shutdown. In the U.S. Department of Education, some of the folks that were furloughed, when they actually put up away messages, like they were changed so that even the away messages that were left by people who have been obviously furloughed are now tailored to blame Democrats for this situation. As I understand it, from Republicans that I've spoken to Democrats that I've spoken to, the crux of the issue is Republicans want to jam through a continuing resolution just to get the government up and running. They are unwilling to discuss the fact that the ACA, which is something that provides health care for 22 million families across the country, is about to sunset. That's immediately got to be addressed. Or healthcare premiums for average Americans are going to skyrocket. We're talking about taking folks from premiums of about $2,500 to $4,000 a year up to $25,000 to $30,000 a year. That's like they want Democrats say like we've got to address this. This is going to hit people hard. It's got to be addressed in the continuing resolution. Republicans refuse to discuss it. So if you are in a red state, what I would suggest that you do is pick up the phone. Don't even call DC. Call your local office in your state. Have a conversation with who picks up the phone. Let them know where you're calling from, that you are a constituent, and say, listen, what's the sticking point here? Why can't we have a conversation? Like we've got to come to a compromise. We need you to do your job. We need the government to be functioning, but we also can't have 22 million people like suddenly have no health care because that is going to be chaos and disaster. So we need you to go in there. We need you to do your job, which is to find a compromise with that is to benefit people across this country. And we need you to get the government functioning because that's what we send you there to do, is to protect us and to make sure the government's functioning. So if you are in a red state, you're listening to us right now, like that's it. It doesn't have to be this bombastic, confrontational, crazy thing. We got to get people in a room to say like, how do we figure this out together? That's what we used to do in politics. It's not my way or the highway. But the bottom line is the people who have the control over this situation right now are the Republicans. Like they have control of the House, they have control of the Senate, they have control of the administration. And frankly, from my view, and in the view of President Trump, it is the job of the president to come in and bring folks together and say, for the benefit of this country, we got to figure this out because we have to have a functioning government. And that's something that he has said in the past. His own words has said like this calls for presidential leadership. We've got to come in and find a compromise because you got to do your job. So I would encourage, like, if you're on that team, if you are a supporter of the president, remind him of the fact that like this is about presidential leadership. We got to get people in the room. We got to have a conversation because it's not like this is not a dictatorship. This is not an authoritarian regime. It's not my way or the highway. People of goodwill have to come together for what's best in the country. And that's what we've got to do in this moment.
And everybody's, the hurt is across so many spectrums in this country. And so you have folks who, whether it be in the urban areas, rural areas, Black, white, Latino, Asian, the hurt and the impact of what's happening in this country is hurting a lot of people. I want to bring up a survey that I recently came upon, Carrie, that really touches on this because it was actually done, and there's sort of a self-identified, sort of center-right polling group that polled so-called rural Americans. And they said about half of the people they polled were actually self-identified as MAGA, but 30% were self-identified as Democrat. And they asked them particularly about the thing we sort of opened up with, which is how hard is it for you to address issues around childcare? And overall, 4 out of 5 of those who responded, rural Americans, say the ability for working parents to find and afford quality childcare is either a state of crisis or a major problem. That includes 81% of rural parents and 80% of rural non-parents. And so this is hitting people all over. People who are actually, are supportive of the president. This is hurting a lot of people. 2/3 of those who responded say federal funding for childcare and early learning programs is a good investment of taxpayer money. And so this is not sort of, a lot of things are partisan in this country, and we understand that. But there are a lot of things that hit all of us, sort of equally, and some people disproportionately, particularly in rural areas where it's in some cases harder to find quality childcare. You have to drive really far and things like that. And so, literally like 78% of those who actually answered this, they support Head Start. They support a lot of the programs that are being negatively impacted by this shutdown. And so, like, there's a really big, again, lastly, I'll just say, there's support within this community. Like half of the people who responded were so-called MAGA. They support the expansion of this child care tax credit. And so this is something that I think really people need to sort of pay attention to, that as we're having these conversations about where we are as a country and how hard it is to pay for certain basic things, that we're all being impacted by it. Now, the question is, how are those who are impacted by it responding to those who are supposed to support us? And those are our elected leaders. Because right now, again, Carrie, I keep saying this over and over again, we are not getting signals from our leaders that any of this is going to change anytime soon.
Well, and that's the thing, is that they've got to fear us as constituents and voters more than they fear the retribution of Donald Trump, who has decided that this is not a priority for him. So that's really where it comes down to, because we saw the reason why the ACA that I was just talking about actually passed, Obamacare, and why we haven't been able to get rid of it, even though Republicans have said, well, we got to get rid of this just because it was inspired by President Obama and Democrats worked on it, is because people really love it. It has bipartisan support. It helps people tremendously. And the minute we start talking about rolling it back, people show up at town halls. People get real mad real fast, and they show up and say, you better not. And this is another moment where we need to see that kind of activism. I will tell you what you're talking about in terms of childcare and Head Start. I'm coming at this, and I'm going to reveal my bias. I'm a former Head Start mama. When I was a single mom, my kids went to Head Start, and it was incredibly valuable to me. When my husband was in hospice, and when I was a single mama, like, we depended on Head Start because mama had to work. And frankly, it was a godsend, because not only could I get my kids out of a home daycare, which was amazing, and it was affordable, and the woman who was running it was so nice, but there was my kids were sitting in front of a TV all day, and like, it was what I could afford. It was not high quality childcare, right? Yeah. So when they got into healthcare, into Head Start, like, they're beautiful little brains that were just hungry and ready for this like, they lit up, and they were on a pathway where now, like, my son Miles, who is, I have this beautiful vision of him graduating from Head Start in my head, and he's going to be 14, and he's in the 8th grade, and he is going like gangbusters. I'm so proud of him. And it was as a result of, literally having that access to early childhood that set him up for success in school. And so it's a couple of things that we got to understand about modern American families. Number one is that in rural areas, yes, there are literally just not enough seats. There's not enough programs for us to be able to find. And that's why they can charge a premium for early childhood spots if Head Start's not available, because there's just not enough seats, and like that's going to drive demand and drive cost and all those things. It makes sense. But there's just not a lot of choices worth choosing. There's not a lot of high quality options. And we desperately rely on things like Head Start, because we as parents are also the backbone of the American economy. It's not just, we want to help out poor folks who can't afford their own childcare. You need to help out poor folks that need to be participating in the American economy and showing up at those jobs so that businesses will function. Like, this is the grand trade-off of capitalism. If you want our work, you have to be able to provide a safe place for our children to go to. Otherwise, we can't participate, right? So, like, we've got to start thinking about not just, is this the right thing to do? Because a mama like me, I'm going to say, like, this is the right thing to do for children. And I can totally see that, because I believe that in my heart. But if we want to just attack this from a pure capitalistic point of view, where are you going to get people to work if nobody's going to take care of these babies? How are we going to have a prepared workforce if we don't have kids accessing high quality early childhood experiences? Because this is the other thing that we're told all the time, is that our kids that are not utilizing this beautiful window of time, 0 to 5, to really accelerate and get ready for that learning, so we're prepared for kindergarten and first grade. These are the kids that fall behind. And it's always parents like us that get pointed out saying, you did not do enough for your kids 0 to 5. They didn't have good access to early childhood. The data tells us that these investments have long-term impacts, not just on academic outcomes, but economic outcomes. So if you want to talk about it from a purely capitalistic point of view, like if that's your jam, like this is a winner to invest in these programs and make sure that they're solid and we can depend on them from that perspective as well.
Well, they say $1 in $7, right? So for every $1 that you invest in a quality early childhood, it's a $7 return on your investment later in life. Less issues around, needing additional supports, being left behind, repeating grades, all the things that we want and we say we need. Same time, even a more immediate sense, Carrie, you go into the businesses that you support, you're wondering why the lines are longer. You're wondering why you can't get the support you need in getting things done. People are calling out because they don't have childcare. People can, employers are looking for workers to come in and be consistent, but they can't when they have to stay home because they don't have quality childcare. And you're wondering why the lines are long and you're not getting, return, or people aren't calling you back and things like that. The entire economy sort of revolves around us all being able to be present both at home when we need to be, but also at work we need to be. And if you don't have that, then everything kind of runs amok. We're almost done. Half hour goes by pretty fast when you got a lot to talk about. And right now we have a lot to talk about. One thing that I'm tracking as far as data that I recently saw, particularly as we're seeing this, response to private school, education being a response from many and trying to address quality education. So one of the things we've always said, particularly about the private school response, is that there's not a lot of accountability and a lot of information. This week, the state of Tennessee was discovered that they're actually not even keeping track of the number of students who have disabilities who are getting these vouchers. And so when we're trying to figure out, well, are these private schools not supporting and taking on students with special needs? Because that's one of the complaints that a lot of these private schools get, because they don't have to necessarily take every student. But the state of Tennessee is not even tracking that. They're also not tracking how many families who actually already in private schools are getting the private school voucher. Because in many states, places like Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas, they found that the majority of those who are getting the vouchers are already in private school. They don't really need it. And so they're sort of eating off the backs of those who they said were going to get it, which were the poor and low income folks. But in actuality, a lot of them are subsidizing rich families to go to, in some cases, better private schools. And so right now, the state of Tennessee is doing what a lot of folks, fear, which is not even gathering information to say, here's how many students with special needs are being served by this voucher, and here's how many families who already in private schools got the voucher. And so for folks like you and I to say, see, I told you, maybe it wasn't what you thought it was. And so this is information that we want to share with you, because you need to know this, that if we're not getting data from our states, and in some cases we're not getting it from the federal government, that it inhibits, what you just mentioned before, having quality sources of information that when you call your elected official, you can say, hey, I saw this data, I saw this research. But if you don't have that, you can't even begin the conversation, Carrie.
And a lot of people are starting to ask those questions, like, frankly, where's the beef? Okay, we're whipping these checks out the door. We're saying that this is innovation, which, I've long been skeptical about, because to me, like, if you're not assessing, if there's no outcomes data, like, that's one hell of a gamble to just say, well, good luck to you. Tom Toke at Georgetown led a beautiful discussion this week in the space, saying the outcomes we're seeing from a number of these states, a number of these programs, like, we're not seeing what we need to see, just in terms not only of where the money is going, but when we can track where the money is going, those educational, venues that we're investing in are not providing the outcomes that that we would expect or that would be encouraging. So I'm encouraged to see a lot of people asking those questions. From NPU this week, Charlie Barone has a brilliant blog post that he has written that actually gets into how parents feel about vouchers, because I think there's been a couple of polls out there, which is, again, why you have to dig into the information, make sure you're getting your information from solid sources. It's real easy to ask parents, do you think it's a great idea if we sent you a check and that you could decide, where that money goes to? When you dig in with parents and you ask them specifically around how that money should be used and where it should be used, there's a lot more that comes, and including making sure that we are only using federal dollars in places that are not being discriminatory to kids, that we are tracking outcomes and getting to meaningful, measurable results. So you gotta take a look under that hood. It's not as simple as, well, parents want checks or parents want more choices. They want choices worth choosing, and they want to know that we are holding those choices accountable so that we're getting kids to the academic outcomes that they're looking for. So you can go to the NPU website. His piece is up there, and we're going to have a lot more to say in the next coming month. We got a lot of really wonderful research coming out of the National Parents Union, the Center for Innovation, and the Center for Policy and Action that's going to be on the horizon in the next couple of weeks.
No, I'm excited for what you're doing. And, I hope that by next week on an episode, this shutdown will be over. And so we'll be back next Friday. We'll be having a special guest next week as well, who's on the ground doing this great work. But again, those who are watching, please like, share, comment on what we're talking about. This is why we're here. News, politics, policy, advocacy, polling on K-12 education from the parents and educators' perspective. It's time, Carrie. We got to go. But any last words before we sign off?
Nope. Stay tuned and make sure you're paying attention. I know it's a lot sometimes, but knowledge is power, and we all need to make sure we're staying informed in this moment.
On that note, thank you all so much for joining us today. We will see you next Friday.